This is You Are My Borough. It's playoff weekend. Borough at Coventry on Sunday for their first leg of the playoff semi-finals. I'm joined by Scott Wilson, who has been to Rockliffe today and tried to read between the lines as Michael Carrick gave us an update on the injury situation. We'll start there, obviously. What is the latest and how's it looking ahead of those Coventry games?
It was a bit like the guessing game again. I mean, listen, given how important the game is, it's understandable that Michael Carrick doesn't want to give too much away. He doesn't give an awful lot away injury-wise at the best of times, but I think it's probably understandable that he wants to keep his cards pretty close to his chest. So what he did say today, which was probably stronger than he's been thus far, is that there is, in his words, a chance that at least one of the four injured players could be back in the squad for the weekend. He then kind of qualified it slightly by saying it's probably a small chance, and it's dependent on what happens in training tomorrow morning, Saturday morning, obviously day before the game, before they travel down to Coventry. But he's clearly hopeful that at least one of those four will be able to make it. Now, we then went on and kind of honed in specifically on Aaron Ramsey, because obviously he's had the England under-20s call-up this week, which led to kind of raised hopes that he might be at least somewhere near. And Carrick pretty much then kind of conceded that, Ramsey he's hopeful on. Now, with the caveat that this is still being jointly managed between Borough and Aston Villa, and there's absolutely no guarantees that he's there. But reading between the lines slightly, I think Ramsey is probably the one who they're most hopeful of being involved on the squad on Sunday. And then beyond that, we'll see. I mean, what I would say is that I think that if Johnny Howson's fit, and the suggestions are he probably won't be for the first leg, but if Johnny Howson was fit, he goes straight back into the starting team. I don't think there's any questions asked about that. The other three, Ramsey, Fours, Fry, I think even if they're back for Sunday, they're probably on the bench, given how long they've been out and the other options that are there and everything. So perhaps we're looking at Ramsey maybe on the bench for Sunday, there if they really need to bring him on, but potentially with a view for being more heavily involved in the second leg on Wednesday when he's, maybe got another 2-3 days training under his belt. I think that's where we're probably at.
And I know we joke about the fact that Carrick doesn't give much away. And like you said, it's understandable really at this stage. He's not going to want to tell Mark Robbins who he does or does not have available. But last week in his pre-match press conference and after the last Coventry game, he was talking about how he's only focused on the players who are available and he can't spend too much time worrying about those who aren't. Even though he said there is only a small chance, that there is a slight change of dynamic there, isn't it? It's certainly more upbeat than it was.
Yeah, I came away from today thinking that there's a decent chance that one of them will be in the squad on Sunday, and maybe even a better chance that 1/2 will be available for Wednesday. Now, let's see, but I think that's where we're at, and all the signs point to the fact that Ramsey's probably the one who's nearest, and that they want to look at in the morning to see how he comes through training, and then, like I said, they'll make that final decision. I mean, I think, again, as we've alluded to, they're in a pretty strong position, Borough, and Carrick's in a pretty strong position that he has got players available to fill those gaps that have been created. Now, they're not necessarily up to the same standard, and I would argue that's probably definitely the case in terms of Howson and who's going to come in for him in central midfield. But more so probably with McGree, Jones, and McNair, who are obviously filling in effectively for Fry, Ramsey, and Force. I don't think there's a need there to rush those players back. It's not like you're saying, we need him back because if we don't have him, it's a real square pegs in round hole territory. Borough aren't there, are they? So I think certainly for this first leg, there's probably a degree of erring on the side of caution. Now, clearly, what you do with the second leg depends on the state of the game, really. If Borough go and win convincingly down at Coventry, you can probably be conservative and err on the side of caution for the second leg. Clearly, if Borough, say, lose at Coventry and are chasing the game, then you roll the dice a bit more, don't you? But I think for Sunday, other than Howson, and like I say, it doesn't sound like he's ready. But other than Howson, I don't think you take a kind of risk or push any of them straight back in. What do you think on that?
Yeah, I think Howson's the only like specialist really in that.
Yeah.
Like you alluded to there with Jones and McGree and McNair and Smith. Those 4 players would probably all get into the team of the other 3 teams who are in the playoffs. Jones and McGree certainly in the attacking positions you could make a case for. Whereas what Howson offers, I guess, on and off the pitch, as we've talked about over recent weeks, is quite unique, isn't it? And you can't really put a value on the experience and the leadership and that sense of calm. But it'd be lovely to, if you're looking at Force and Ramsey, for example, even just having them as game changers for the last half an hour, even if you're ahead on aggregate against Coventry and you're playing against tired legs for the last half an hour, bringing one of them off the bench for the second leg on next Wednesday is the last thing the opposition defence is going to want, isn't it? You would look at Fry. I'm a huge Dale Fry fan, and when Fry's fit, he starts for me in that Borough defence. But you would look at Fry and think it's unlikely, hugely unlikely, that he's going to change. He's going to make a change at the back now. Fry hasn't played for 6 weeks, has he?
That's the difference, isn't it? Johnny Howson's been out for a couple of weeks. Johnny Howson could go straight back in with 1 day's training under his belt. You wouldn't worry about that. Because Dale's been out for so long, you'd feel that, in an ideal world, he'd need a week of full training, really, just to be, sharp and up to anything like full speed, to then be pitched straight into a playoff semi-final against a Coventry side with probably the best number 9 in the league. So, I'd be amazed if Dale, even if he's fit and available, would be thrown straight in, probably to either leg of a semi-final. Now, the final's a bit different because you've got a week and a half between, so you've got a bit more time there to get players training and get them up, etc., etc. But where we're at right now, I'd be very surprised if someone like Dale was pitched straight in, even if he was to be fit.
If Howson isn't fit, I think you could have a good stab now at naming the starting 11. And I think 9 of 11 starters are nailed on.
Well, let's pop it up here and see if what I've come up with you agree with. This is going to test you, because you might say that this is now utter rubbish.
Well, hold on. Right. Well, yeah. So that I was going to say, for me, the only 2 where there's a slight question mark, Mowat or Barlaser are in midfield, and Smith or Dijksteel at back. But for all Dijksteel has impressed in recent weeks, Smith's been his go-to man, and I just think Mowat gives that little bit more steel in the away leg than Barlaser.
That's exactly my thinking on it. Yeah, that's my thinking on it. I'd be very surprised if he didn't start Smith. For all that Dijksteel's come in and done well when Smith's been out, he's relied on Smith all season. He's kind of your steady Eddie. You know what you're going to get from him, especially away from home. And like you say, I think just the fact that this leg is away from home, it's the first of 2 legs. So it's the classic first round of the Open Golf. You can't win the game on it.
Don't lose it.
But you can lose it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think he'll go with Mowat just because of the extra kind of steel and solidity that he gives you in there, assuming Howson doesn't make it.
What were there any other talking points then from the press conference? What was the general feel ahead of the game?
Yeah, I thought so. There was a couple of interesting things. I think, firstly, what I thought was quite interesting was we asked him a little bit on the fact that look, this is a 2-legged tie, and Michael Carrick has spent his career playing big 2-legged ties as a player at Man United in Europe, but actually, for a team in the Championship, it's incredibly rare nowadays that you play a 2-legged tie. Does that come into your thinking? And he was pretty forceful in saying, well, yes, it has to. This is different. It is a different setup. We're going to Coventry, but we know that on the back of going to Coventry, we're bringing them back to the Riverside, and whatever happens, that's still to come. So I took that away thinking that I'm not saying that they're going there not to lose, but I think Borough are going to Coventry very mindful of the fact that they don't have to settle anything in this game. You know what I mean? That I think that certainly for the first half hour or so, it wouldn't surprise me if Borough just settle themselves into the game and try and keep things tight in a way that they wouldn't necessarily if they were going there knowing they had to win the game or everything was finished. I think there is a sense that, look, there's 4 halves to this game. Let's just kind of settle ourselves in and ease ourselves in the first half of the first game. Now, I could be completely wrong. Maybe he'll pull a rabbit from a hat and Borough will, set up way more attacking than we think they will. But assuming the side that we think is going to play, I came away from that thinking it wouldn't surprise me if Sunday is a pretty cagey affair all round, to be perfectly honest. Because I suspect Coventry are kind of thinking the same. The 2 games between the 2 teams this season have been tight. Coventry clearly just want to keep, the overriding priority is keeping themselves in this game. I think Sunday will be quite a tight affair. So that was one thing. And then the second interesting thing I thought was just the dynamic of the press conference, really, because, I think we've discussed this on the pod before, that actually, in terms of the championship, it doesn't have a massive profile amongst kind of the national pack, if you like. National journalists will turn up every now and then to Borough press conferences. But today was the first time when really pretty much every kind of Northeast national journalist was there. Every paper pretty much was represented. And so it's interesting because obviously the story that they tell to a national audience is different to the story that we tell every week to Borough fans and local readers. And it just kind of drove home to me how much nationally the narrative around Borough pretty much starts and finishes at Michael Carrick. That's the story of the playoffs nationally for Borough. It's the fact that it's Michael Carrick, England international, massive name, Man United, in his first managerial job. He's got Borough to the playoffs. Can he now get them up into the Premier League? And what would it be like to have Michael Carrick managing in the Premier League next season? And I just think, that's an interesting dynamic sometimes because we're so wrapped up in everything else. We kind of lose track of the fact that Borough have this kind of nationally interesting manager with a really big profile. And I think if Borough do get promoted, then even more next season, it'll be Michael Carrick going up against Man United. It'll be Michael Carrick taking on Man City and Pep. It'll be Michael Carrick going back to Newcastle to take on Newcastle. Do you know what I mean? I think that's interesting.
And how did he deal with that? Because for all that is the inevitable story. Is the most modest and humble, or certainly comes across that way. He certainly doesn't court that attention, does he?
No, he doesn't. He doesn't, and he's not one to kind of throw in the whole Man United thing. But to be fair to him, he doesn't shy away from talking about it either. I think he accepts that it's a part of who he is. It's a massive part of his football story, and he knows that he's going to get these questions now. If Borough are in the Premier League next season and there's a bigger profile, then every week he won't be getting Man United questions and everything.
Have you spoken to Sir Alex before this game? Yeah.
That was one of the questions today. Will you be speaking to Sir Alex before this game? And he answered it perfectly nicely. If memory serves me right, he effectively said words to the thing of, well, yeah, I might, but then I kind of speak to him every week anyway as a friend. We have those conversations. We send messages to each other pretty regularly. It wouldn't be out the ordinary for me to speak to my Sir Alex Ferguson. I'm not just doing it because it's the playoffs. But yeah, he was asked on that. He was asked on, big games at Man United. What's it like having big games as a player compared to a manager, et cetera, et cetera. And I think he accepts that at the minute is part of the narrative. I guess he hopes that come halfway through next season, if Borough are a Premier League club and he's got that attention, then eventually you get beyond that and the narrative changes a bit. And I guess it will. But at the moment, he's still nationally very much ex-Man United player Michael Carrick managing Borough.
And that's not too dissimilar to the last time Borough were in the playoffs and the last time Borough were in the Premier League, because the story then was Jose Mourinho's assistant, Aitor Karanka.
Have you spoken to Jose before this weekend's game, Aitor?
Was it Brighton away when Jose was in the stands and went down and spoke to
I think it was, yeah.
Keep your eye out for Sir Alex in the stands at the Coventry Building Society Arena on
down
Sunday.
The Dickens.
Yeah, but it was very similar then, wasn't it? And certainly in the Premier League, I remember that first Man United game when Aitor came up against Josie. It was all eyes on that, wasn't it? Rather than what was on the pitch. It was Aitor.
And clearly, like I say, we will get that next season if we are Borough v Man United, Borough v Newcastle. Carrick goes back to his roots, kind of thing. Carrick v Pep, Carrick v Arteta, Carrick v Company again. You know what I mean? But in the Premier League this time, it'll be all of that. And like I say, I think at the minute he accepts that. Yeah, that's part and parcel of it. Now let's see where we're at if it carries on like that. But yeah, he's pretty amenable with it all at the moment.
On the subject of Karanka's team, how do you think this Borough team compares with the playoff team, the Bamford team, and the team that lost to Norwich at Wembley?
That's a good question. I think
there's a bit more because I think because you kind of look back now, and Aitor was kind of the arch pragmatist, wasn't he? And you look back like that, but I think that became more of a thing over the time he was here. And actually, in that first full season, you think of that Millwall goal that still does the rounds now every now and again at Riverside. Some of the football Borough played that season was like free flowing and really good to watch. I don't think it was as good as what we've seen from Borough in patches this year. But it was more the year after, wasn't it? And certainly in the Premier League season, I think that was Aitor's problem in the Premier League. He set out not to lose games rather than to win them, didn't he?
I think this team has more match winners. I think it's got more goal threats. And if you think back to that playoff run under Aitor, so much of it is Bamford going to be fit? Because if Bamford's not fit, how are Borough going to score goals? And so obviously we all know what happened. Bamford got rushed back. He wasn't really fit. He hobbled around for a bit at Wembley, and that was kind of the end of that. Let's keep everything crossed that we're not in this position. But if Archer or if Akpom were to pick up an injury and have to miss, say, the second leg, I still think the Borough had more than enough match winners elsewhere in that team, whether it be McGree, whether it be Ramsey coming back, whether it be Jones now he's back firing, Force if they can get him back fit. I think there are options there. I don't think Borough are as reliant on one attacking player, so that would be one thing that I'd say. I think defensively there's probably similarities. It'd be interesting in looking at the two records defensively over the course of the season, but. Both teams have been pretty solid all the way through, haven't they?
Yeah, where you see those kind of combined 11. It'd be interesting and good fun on here to do that. Before the final.
We'll do that before the final. Yeah, there's a challenge for everyone. If you're watching this, assuming Borough do make it through. Then send us your comments with your combined 11s and we'll have a go at it as well, because that would be interesting.
I wouldn't fancy coming up against a Howson and Leadbitter midfield at their pomp. There's no shirking of tackles there, is there? Although you can't leave Hackney out. It'd be tough. It'd be hard to do that. Yeah, it'd be tough to do that. I'm sure I've told this one before, but when I went to do an interview with Grant Leadbitter after he'd retired, and he was great, like looking back on his time at Borough, and he did his kind of best Borough 11 of the time he was there, and he had himself in the middle of the park, as you would do, rightly so.
You've got to do that, though, haven't you? You've got to do that. Yeah, if you're picking your best team, you've got to do that. Yeah, well,
this caught me out with Josh McEachran.
Josh McEachran.
Yeah. I remember. I can't remember the full team. I'd have to dig it out. But
that's McEachran. Well, that's a blast from the mind. I mean, we'll no doubt have a wander down kind of Wembley memorable memory lane if and when Borough hopefully do make that final. But let's just hope the bus driver's got his route sorted a little bit better because
I can still see that picture of Leo frantically getting off the bus and running in, waving.
Goodness,
waving the team sheet. And Coventry, what has any news come out of them this week ahead of the first leg game? I'd seen Robbins saying that his players need to produce the game of their lives.
I mean, you were obviously there last weekend, and Sheaf was on the bench, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And I think the expectation is that he will start. He's the one for them who's been coming back from injury. And I think he was on the bench with a view to, if things were going wrong on Monday, he would probably have come on to try and change things for them. I think he will probably come back into that midfield, but I suspect he'll be the only change, because obviously, unlike Borough, who have been making changes and swapping around a bit, Coventry played their full team on Monday because they needed to win, or it needed to get the draw, obviously. So I think he'll come in. I suspect that's the only change. Yeah, I mean, I saw little bits of Mark Robbins' press conference, and I think, broadly similar to Michael Carrick in that, a lot of the focus from both kind of pre-matches has been on this kind of weird situation where they played each other last weekend, and what can you take from it, and will it have any difference? And I think both managers have pretty much said, look, there's this idea that we can learn a bit from having played against them, but our analysts have watched 25 Coventry games or 25 Borough games in the last week. They've watched every game this season. We know inside out really how Borough play, just as Borough know inside out how Coventry play. So you don't really need to come up against it to kind of see that and get that. I understand that. I see where that's coming from. So I think once the game gets underway on Sunday, I don't think that there'll be much relevance to the fact that they played each other last weekend. Do you?
No, I don't think so. Because I think last weekend was completely different in that only one team needed a result.
Yeah,
that's the reality of the situation. And even in the second half, as we discussed in the pod earlier this week, there was a kind of weird dynamic where there was a stage where Coventry didn't really know what to do. And it became a bit of a non-event, really. So, I think it's completely different now. I think what we saw from Coventry is what we'll see again from Coventry. Gyökeres is clearly the main man, as Mark was saying on the podcast earlier this week.
Yeah,
he's really dynamic and mobile, isn't he? He's a big, powerful lad, but he's by no means a target man.
No,
and he was definitely peeling off to that left-hand side, and McNair and Smith. But I thought
you were very impressed with Hamer, weren't you?
Yeah, I think he's and when I'd looked, I think Hamer has 10 assists this season, but so does Gyökeres. And I think that, for a striker who scored 21 goals.
Who scored as many goals as he has. Yeah, that's telling, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So there's like you were saying about Borough, really, in that they're not overly reliant on one player. In Akpom, you made that point earlier this season, didn't you? If Akpom, for whatever reason, stopped scoring, it wouldn't necessarily be the end of the world for Borough. Well, Gyökeres offers Coventry far more than just goals.
Yes.
But yeah,
I mean, where do you stand on the whole two-legged thing? And I think obviously it depends which way games go, and early goals can change things and everything. But my general feeling with the first leg of playoff games, if I had no skin in this game at all, if I had no interest in it really, as someone who quite likes a flutter every now and then, my blind, almost what I would normally do is almost blind back a draw in the first leg of a playoff semi-final without really knowing which two teams were in it or anything. My gut reaction would be that if you just backed a draw blind for the first leg of every playoff semi-final, you'd probably make money. Now, someone would probably go and do the stats and the figures and tell me actually you'd have lost a fortune, which goes pretty much with my general gambling anyway. But that would be my kind of gut reaction for any playoff game, that actually there's a fairly decent chance it might end up in a draw. Because I think in these games, first legs in particular, if it's a draw at half time, then there's almost more to lose than to win in the second half, if that makes kind of sense.
Yeah, and latching on the back of what you were saying about how Borough might approach the first leg, I think if Borough were to come back to the Riverside with any sort of results, then they'd be so confident just because of the home form, and B, just how many goals they've scored at home and how they've blown teams away. We were talking about it earlier this week, weren't we? Borough haven't failed to score in a home game. Only Burnley have won at the Riverside since Carrick took charge. It'd be a daunting prospect for Coventry if they had to come to the Riverside and get a result on Wednesday, wouldn't it? And I think that'll play into Borough's hands. Whereas we were saying earlier this week that I think Sunderland will benefit from playing away second. I think it'll definitely benefit Borough to be coming back home for the second leg. Sorry about that little glitch. We're back, hopefully. Scott, you also spoke to Darragh Lenihan over at Rockliffe on Friday. What came out of that chat?
Yeah, he was very impressive, actually. We spoke to him kind of a few times during the season, and he's just a very level-headed, kind of composed bloke, really. And yeah, he was interesting. There was a few things we talked a little bit about. Obviously, this time last year, he just missed out on the playoffs with Blackburn. And there was, questions about his future. At that stage, he knew there was interest from Borough. And I think he admitted that it was a big decision because Blackburn had been a massive part of his life. There was every chance Blackburn were going to go again and come close to the playoffs again this season, which is obviously exactly what happened. But he made the decision to move to Borough. And then as we put to him, 2 months in, you must have been thinking, Christ almighty, have I done the right thing here? And he said, yeah, look, it was a tough start to the season. Things didn't go to plan. It was difficult. But, there was always the sense that, there was a togetherness within the squad and there was a quality within the squad that we just kind of knew as a group that there was a way out of it. And B, yes, it was October or whatever, but even then in the back of their minds, and it's interesting, I think, that he referenced this, there was the fact that we all knew that Forest the season before had been, in the bottom three at Christmas, and yet it still got promoted. So, the Championship is such a long season, and there's so many ups and downs within it that we always knew there was more than enough time to get ourselves back into it. And then obviously we spoke to him a little bit about Michael Carrick and working under him, and it was interesting that he said that Carrick is very, very hands-on in training, very quick to kind of pass on little tactical things and almost walk players through it and everything. And you got the sense that is a big part of Michael Carrick, that this idea that he's a head coach is probably more than just a kind of title, if you know what I mean. I think he genuinely is the head of that coaching team and loves putting players through their paces.
And Lenihan has been something of an unsung hero this season, hasn't he? I mean, he's barely put a foot wrong, really, since Carrick came in.
Yeah, since Carrick came in is the interesting thing, because obviously at the start of the season,
a shaky start, didn't he?
And Borough was shipping goals left, right, and centre under Wilder, weren't they? Which was very uncharacteristic, really, of Borough. And you were looking at it thinking, well, they brought in this guy from Blackburn who's supposed to be this big leader and massive voice in the back four, etc., etc. But actually, Borough are all over the place at the back. Well, it was a back five, wasn't it, a lot of the time under Wilder? But what we've seen under Carrick is what Borough always knew they were getting when they signed Darragh Lenihan. He has been very solid. He clearly is a leader. He's a big presence on the pitch. He's a big presence on the dressing room. And like you say, defensively, he's barely put a foot out of place since Carrick came in, which has been testament to him, but also clearly massively beneficial to Borough.
And wearing the armband as well in the absence of Housen, which shows his experience. I mean, I'd imagine Lenihan is one of the players. Housen has talked about, he's desperate to win promotion with Borough and for another crack at the Premier League. I'd imagine Lenihan's one of those who really wants a crack at the top flight now.
Yeah, well, that's it. And he did say that, look, I've never been in the Premier League. And I came here to win promotion. It's as simple as that. And obviously he's at the age now, and he's late 20s, where this is the peak of his career. And, if he doesn't make the Premier League in the next couple of years, there's every chance he probably won't. So, and there's, for various different reasons, there's quite a few members of this Borough squad where, this is a really, really big moment in their careers, these next 3 games, hopefully, isn't it? There's players like, say, Stefan, who you would imagine his career could take him in innumerable different directions, could end up playing in the Premier League, could end up playing at World Cups, could end up playing anywhere in continental Europe. It wouldn't be surprise you. But there's probably other players within the squad, House and obviously Lenihan, Crooks, maybe, where this is kind of their shot. This is their chance at it.
Akpom, I mean, after the
Akpom,
season, what a chance to show that it's not just a one-season wonder, that he can build on it, and he can build on it at the top level. And I think another one, just tapping into what you were saying there, before we wrap up, when you were saying about the early stages of the season and Lenihan, almost that period of thinking, what have I done here type thing? Have I made the right decision? Ryan Giles must have been another one thinking that, because I remember speaking to Giles back in the summer. I think it was at York, a friendly at York. And Giles was saying then how Chris Wilder was a huge influence in making the decision, because he played with wing backs and he looked and thought, I want to be part of that. And then when it doesn't go to plan, you look at Giles at 23, he had a few loan moves that didn't really go to plan. Blackburn last year didn't really take off for him. In those first couple of months of the season, he must have been thinking again, I'm at risk of losing another season here if this doesn't pick up. And then there's the uncertainty of a new manager. And yet here he is now. We spoke to him last week, and he talked about how he's had the best season of his career. And if Borough go up, then you can well believe that signing Giles on a permanent deal will become an absolute priority. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, to be fair, both Giles and Stefan pretty much had the pick of the championship, didn't they? They could pretty much have chosen whichever championship team they wanted.
Archer in January.
And Archer in January,
probably Ramsey in January as well.
Probably Ramsey in January. But Giles and Stefan in particular, you're right. Come the middle of the autumn, you do wonder if they were thinking, "Oh goodness me, have I made the right decision here?" Because you're right, there was a very real chance this season could have just drifted into nothingness, and then all of a sudden, like you say, Ryan Giles becomes a player who's had 2 or 3 championships loans, none of which have massively worked. As it is now, Ryan Giles is a player who, regardless of what happens with Borough, you could well imagine will be a regular in a Premier League team next season. Hopefully it's with Borough. If for whatever reason it isn't, then, I'd be surprised if Ryan Giles, because he's had a really good season and he's caught eyes left, right and centre.
Before we wrap up then, predictions. I think you kind of gave us one in a roundabout way when you were talking about what the bet you'd have on. Are you fancying a draw on the first leg?
And I would stick with that. I think it might be 1-1 on Sunday.
I agree, yeah.
And like you, I think that is more than good enough for Borough, because I think if it was to be 1-1, then they would come back to the Riverside and 2-1, 3-1, whatever. But I would make Borough really strong favourites to go through if they come away from Coventry with a 1-1 draw at the weekend. And I think that's what they'll get. I'd be surprised if it wasn't pretty tight. I'd be surprised if either team won by more than 1 goal. Very surprised, and I think it might be a draw, which would suit Borough.
Brilliant. Well, we're both there on Sunday at the Coventry Building Society Arena, so we'll bring you live coverage throughout, match reaction, analysis, and then obviously we'll get together early next week to reflect on that first leg, to look ahead to the second leg. If there's anything as ever that you want us to discuss on the pod, on the vid, then just give us a shout, and do let us know those combined 11s ahead of what will hopefully
Wembley.
A Wembley appearance for Borough. Thanks for watching and listening, and do remember to like and subscribe. Have a good weekend.